For decades, your doctor pointed at the salt shaker, put it away, hide it, never touch it again, and you listened, you switched to bland food, you read every nutrition label, you turned down meals at restaurants, you became the person at the dinner table who says, no, thank you, I'm watching my sodium, and your blood pressure didn't change. Maybe it went down a few points for a few weeks, then it crept right back up. And when you went back to your doctor, they handed you the same prescription and the same advice, less salt. Here's what nobody told you. For a very specific group of people, and research now suggests this includes the majority of adults over 50 with stubborn hypertension, salt is not the primary driver of their elevated blood pressure. Something else is something you are almost certainly consuming every single day, something that is hiding inside foods that are marketed to you as healthy, something that is quietly triggering a cascade of events inside your body that forces your blood vessels to stay contracted, your kidneys to hold onto fluid, and your heart to work far harder than it should. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes I'm going to walk you through the actual mechanism, not a theory, not a trend, the actual biological process that connects what you eat to the pressure reading on that cuff. My name is Dr. Thomas Ellison. I've been practicing medicine for over a decade, and for most of that time I gave the same advice every physician gives. And before we go any further, if you're type of health advice that sounds good but never seems to solve the real problem, make sure you're subscribed. Every week, I break down the hidden mechanisms behind the most common health conditions affecting adults over 50. Our goal is to help 1,000 new people improve their health this month. And if that's something you want for yourself, join us. Watch your sodium, use a low-salt shaker, avoid processed foods high in sodium. It's not wrong advice, but I've come to understand that for a large portion of my patients, particularly those in their 50s and 60s and 70s, that advice was incomplete. It was addressing a symptom of a deeper problem without ever identifying the root cause. And the root cause has a name. It's metabolic dysfunction driven by chronic sugar overconsumption. And once I started looking at my patients through that lens, everything changed. Let's start with what you've been told, because I think it's important to honor the fact that low sodium advice is not made up. It comes from real science. In the 1940s, a physician named Dr. Walter Kempner demonstrated that a severely sodium-restricted diet could reduce blood pressure dramatically. His patients ate almost nothing but rice and fruit. Blood pressure dropped. The medical world took note, and from that point forward, sodium became the villain of cardiovascular medicine. Fast forward to today, and the American Heart Association still recommends keeping sodium under 2,300 milligrams per day, ideally under 1,500 for adults with hypertension. But here's where the story gets complicated. Large-scale meta-analyses, studies that pool the results of dozens of individual trials, have consistently shown that for the majority of people, reducing sodium intake produces only a modest reduction in blood pressure. We're talking about 3 to 5 millimeters of mercury on average. That's not nothing, but it's also not the dramatic rescue that the salt restriction narrative promised. And there's a subset of the population, researchers call them salt-sensitive, for whom sodium restriction does matter significantly. But estimates suggest this represents only about 25 to 30% of people with hypertension. That means for the other 70 to 75%, putting away the salt shaker is largely symbolic. Now here's where modern research is pointing instead. It's not your total sodium intake that matters most, it's your sodium to potassium ratio. Think of it this way. Sodium and potassium are like two sides of a seesaw inside your cells. Sodium pushes fluid in, potassium pushes fluid out. And when that ratio is balanced, your cells and blood vessels function properly. When sodium overwhelms potassium, which happens when you eat a modern processed diet, the seesaw tips, fluid accumulates, and pressure rises. The problem is not that you're salting your eggs in the morning. The problem is that you're not eating nearly enough potassium-rich foods, spinach, avocado, sweet potato, white beans, to counterbalance the sodium that's already embedded in every packaged product you consume. But even fixing the potassium-sodium ratio is only part of the answer. Because there's a mechanism operating underneath all of this that your doctor has almost certainly never explained to you, and it begins with something far sweeter than salt. I'm going to explain that mechanism in detail in just a moment, including exactly what it does to your kidneys. But first, I need to set the stage with something that surprised even me when I first reviewed this research. Your kidneys are extraordinary organs. Every single day, they filter approximately 180 liters of blood. They remove waste, balance minerals, regulate fluid, and ultimately determine how much water your body holds at any given time. When your kidneys are working properly, blood pressure stays in a healthy range. But your kidneys don't work in isolation. They respond to hormonal signals, and one of the most powerful signals they respond to is insulin. Here's what happens when you eat sugar, and I mean any sugar, whether it's table sugar, high fructose corn syrup, fruit juice, white bread, or white rice. Your blood glucose rises. Your pancreas releases insulin to move that glucose into your cells. Under normal circumstances, that insulin spike is temporary. Glucose enters the cells, insulin levels drop, and everything returns to baseline. But when this happens repeatedly, day after day, meal after meal, your cells begin to resist insulin signal, and they stop responding. Your pancreas compensates by releasing even more insulin. And now you have chronically elevated insulin circulating through your bloodstream. This is called insulin resistance. And I want to be very clear, you do not have to be diabetic to have insulin resistance. Millions of adults over 50 have significant insulin resistance and have no idea because standard checkups don't test for it directly. Now here's what elevated insulin does to your kidneys. The kidneys have insulin receptors. When insulin signals those receptors, the kidneys increase their reabsorption of sodium. That means instead of excreting sodium through urine the way they should, they pull it back into the bloodstream. More sodium in the blood means more water retained to dilute it. More water retained means higher blood volume. Higher blood volume means higher pressure pushing against your arterial walls. This is not a theory. This mechanism was clearly described in research published in the journal Hypertension and has been replicated across multiple studies. Insulin directly causes sodium retention in the kidneys. And the more insulin resistant you become, the worse this gets. But insulin resistance doesn't only affect your kidneys, it attacks your blood vessels directly. When blood glucose remains chronically elevated, it triggers a process called glycation. Glucose molecules attach themselves to proteins throughout your body, including the proteins that make up your arterial walls. These damaged proteins are called advanced glycation end products, or AGEs. Think of it like this. Imagine your arteries as garden hoses. Healthy arteries are flexible, elastic, and able to expand and contract with every heartbeat. But when AGEs accumulate in the arterial walls, those walls stiffen. They lose their elasticity, they can no longer absorb the pressure of the blood pumping through them. And when a rigid pipe carries the same amount of pressure that a flexible pipe was designed to handle, the pressure reading goes up. This is why so many adults over 50 with insulin resistance develop what's called isolated systolic hypertension, where the top number is high, but the bottom number is relatively normal. The pump is working fine. The pipes are just too stiff to respond properly. A patient I'll call Raymond came to see me about 3 years ago. 64 years old, retired electrician, genuinely careful about his sodium. He hadn't owned a salt shaker in 6 years. His blood pressure readings consistently ran between 145 and 155 over 85. We had him on 2 medications, still not controlled. When I reviewed his dietary history, what stood out was not salt, it was sugar. Raymond drank 2 glasses of orange juice every morning because he believed it was healthy. He ate whole wheat bread, low-fat yogurt with fruit on the bottom, and granola bars as snacks. Every one of those foods was spiking his blood glucose and driving insulin resistance. His kidneys were retaining sodium regardless of how little he added at the table. We're going to talk about exactly how to identify those hidden sources shortly, but first I need to explain one more mechanism, because this one is perhaps the most underappreciated of all. There's a specific type of sugar that behaves differently from everything else you eat. Fructose. When you consume glucose from starches, grains, or whole fruit, your body can metabolize it in virtually every cell. The liver only handles a fraction of it, but fructose is almost entirely processed by the liver. It cannot be used by other organs. The liver has to deal with all of it. And when fructose arrives at the liver in large quantities, as it does when you drink a can of soda, a glass of juice, a sweetened coffee drink, or eat any product containing high fructose corn syrup, the liver processes it rapidly, almost frantically, producing energy very quickly. A byproduct of that rapid fructose processing is uric acid. You may have heard of uric acid in the context of gout. Gout is a painful joint condition caused by uric acid crystal accumulation. But elevated uric acid does something far more dangerous to your cardiovascular system that has nothing to do with your joints. Uric acid inhibits the production of nitric oxide. Now, nitric oxide is one of the most important molecules in your cardiovascular system. It is the primary signal that tells your blood vessels to relax and dilate. Think of nitric oxide as the message your arteries receive that says, you can open up now, let the blood flow freely. You don't need to squeeze. When nitric oxide production is functioning well, your blood vessels respond to physical activity, stress, and changes in blood flow by appropriately dilating. Pressure is managed. The heart doesn't have to work against maximal resistance. But when uric acid suppresses nitric oxide, and this happens every time you consume significant amounts of fructose, your blood vessels lose that signal. They stay contracted. They cannot relax properly. And the result is chronically elevated blood pressure that has nothing to do with how much salt you put on your food. Research published in the journal Circulation demonstrated that experimentally raising uric acid levels in healthy individuals produced measurable increases in blood pressure within weeks simply by blocking nitric oxide synthesis. And when medication was given to lower uric acid, blood pressure improved independently of any other intervention. A study from the University of Colorado showed that adolescents with elevated uric acid levels were significantly more likely to develop hypertension before the age of 30. This is not a mechanism exclusive to older adults, but in adults over 50 who may already have years of fructose overconsumption behind them, the accumulated damage to nitric oxide pathways is substantial. Here's what makes this particularly difficult. The foods highest in fructose are often the ones marketed most aggressively as healthy options. Fruit juice, flavored waters, sports drinks, energy bars, low-fat salad dressings, sweetened oatmeal packets. And this brings us to the section that I think will be the most practically useful part of this entire conversation. I want you to imagine going through your kitchen right now, not your salt shaker, your pantry, your refrigerator, your fruit bowl on the counter, because what I'm about to share with you is a pattern I see repeatedly in patients who come to me genuinely confused about why their blood pressure won't respond to anything they've tried. Let's start with breakfast, the meal most often promoted as the foundation of heart-healthy eating. Flavored oatmeal packets, marketed as whole grain, heart-healthy, high fiber. A single packet of a leading brand contains 12 grams of added sugar. If you add a glass of orange juice on the side, which contains approximately 26 grams of sugar, almost entirely fructose, you've consumed 38 grams of sugar before 9 in the morning. That is nearly 10 teaspoons of sugar, and your blood pressure medication hasn't had a chance to fully absorb yet. Yogurt. Low-fat fruit on the bottom yogurt is one of the most commonly consumed healthy foods among adults over 50. A single serving of many popular brands contains between 17 and 26 grams of sugar. The low-fat label is almost always compensated for by added sugar because fat carries flavor, and when manufacturers remove fat, they replace it with sweeteners to maintain palatability. Granola and granola bars. A half-cup serving of many commercial granolas contains 12 to 17 grams of sugar. Most people pour far more than a half cup of granola bar. Tries an afternoon snack adds another 10 to 15 grams. Whole wheat bread? Here I want to address a misconception directly. Whole wheat bread, even the authentic kind, has a glycemic index nearly as high as white bread. 2 slices of whole wheat bread raise blood glucose comparably to 2 slices of white bread. For someone with insulin resistance, this is a meaningful distinction. Salad dressings. A standard 2 tablespoon serving of low-fat Italian dressing contains 3 to 5 grams of sugar. Honey mustard dressings can reach 8 to 10 grams per serving, and most people use far more than 2 tablespoons. Tomato sauce from a jar. A half-cup serving of many commercial pasta sauces contains 10 to 12 grams of added sugar. Sugar is added to neutralize the acidity of tomatoes and to enhance shelf appeal. Now let's talk about the ingredient list, because food manufacturers are not required to call sugar by one name. On labels, sugar hides under more than 60 different names. Some of the most common: high fructose corn syrup solids, dextrose, maltose, evaporated cane juice, fruit juice concentrate, agave nectar, brown rice syrup, malt syrup, and maltodextrin. Maltodextrin deserves special attention. It is technically classified as a complex carbohydrate, which means manufacturers can sometimes list it separately from sugars, but its glycemic index is actually higher than table. Sugar, it spikes blood glucose faster and higher than virtually anything else you can consume. Here's a practical rule I give every patient. The 3-step label check. 1. Look at total sugars per serving. Minusing above 5 grams per serving warrants scrutiny. 2. Scan the first 5 ingredients. If any form of sugar appears in the first 5, the product is primarily sugar-driven regardless of what the front of the package claims. 3. Count the number of different sugar aliases on the ingredient list. Products with 3 or more different sugar names are using a deliberate strategy to fragment the total sugar content so it appears lower on the list. Now here's where this connects directly to the global rise in what researchers call resistant hypertension and blood pressure that does not respond adequately to medication. Between 1990 and today, global consumption of ultra-processed foods has increased dramatically across every income level and every geographic region. The same time period has seen a parallel rise in hypertension rates that low-sodium campaigns have been unable to reverse. A landmark analysis published in the British Medical Journal, tracking over 100,000 adults across multiple countries, found that every 10% increase in ultra-processed food consumption was associated with a significant increase in cardiovascular risk independent of sodium content. The sodium was not the variable that changed the outcome. The processed carbohydrate and sugar load was. This is not a fringe theory. This is the scientific literature catching up to what metabolic medicine has been observing for years. Now I want to give you something you can actually use, because I don't believe in spending the entirety of a conversation identifying problems without offering a clear path forward. The goal here is not another restrictive diet that makes you miserable. The goal is to reset what researchers call your body's pressure sensors, the hormonal and vascular feedback loops that are currently stuck in a high-pressure state. through targeted metabolic improvements. Let me walk you through this in practical terms. Step 1. Reduce the insulin load of every meal. You don't have to eliminate carbohydrates entirely, but you need to begin thinking about what each meal does to your blood glucose. The practical framework is this. Pair every carbohydrate source with protein, fat, or fiber. These slow gastric emptying blunt the glucose spike and reduce the insulin response. Instead of orange juice in the morning, eat an actual orange. The fiber in the whole fruit dramatically changes how your body processes the fructose. The glucose rises slower, the liver is not overwhelmed. Instead of flavored oatmeal, use plain rolled oats with a tablespoon of nut butter and a handful of berries. You've transformed a high-sugar meal into a protein and fiber-stabilized one. Instead of low-fat yogurt, choose full-fat plain Greek yogurt. Add your own berries. You've eliminated the added sugar entirely while keeping the beneficial probiotics. Step 2. Aggressively increase potassium and magnesium intake. These two minerals are the nutritional counterweights to the metabolic damage caused by chronic sugar overconsumption. Potassium, as I mentioned earlier, directly counteracts sodium retention in the kidneys, but it also plays a role in arterial relaxation. Studies consistently show that adults who consume adequate potassium, WALF recommended intake is 4,700 milligrams per day, have significantly lower rates of hypertension, regardless of sodium intake. Most adults over 50 consume less than half that amount. The highest potassium foods, white beans, 1 cup provides over 1,000 milligrams, and avocado, approximately 700 milligrams per fruit, spinach, approximately 840 milligrams per cooked cup, sweet potato, approximately 950 milligrams per medium potato, salmon, approximately 800 milligrams per serving, and bananas, approximately 420 milligrams, though people overestimate this one. Magnesium is equally critical and equally underconsumed in adults over 50. Magnesium is a natural calcium channel blocker. Calcium channel blockers are an entire class of blood pressure medications. What they do is prevent calcium from causing smooth muscle cells and arterial walls to contract. Magnesium does this naturally. When magnesium levels are adequate, arterial walls are more relaxed, more responsive to nitric oxide, and better able to dilate under pressure. A 2016 meta-analysis published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that magnesium supplementation produced statistically significant reductions in both systolic and diastolic blood pressure in adults with magnesium deficiency, which, it turns out, is most adults over 50 because the kidneys excrete more magnesium as we age and because many blood pressure medications themselves deplete magnesium. Foods highest in magnesium, pumpkin seeds 1 ounce, provides approximately 150 milligrams, dark leafy greens, almonds, black beans, dark chocolate, above 70% cacao, and importantly, fatty fish. Step 3. Target the fructose-uric acid pathway specifically. This one is more targeted. The goal is to reduce the fructose load, reaching your liver while simultaneously supporting nitric oxide production through nutrition. Practical changes. Eliminate liquid sugar entirely. This means soda, fruit juice, sweet tea, sports drinks, flavored coffees, and energy drinks. These deliver fructose to the liver at a speed that whole food never could. A glass of apple juice, for example, contains approximately 24 grams of sugar with 0 fiber to slow its absorption. It hits the liver like a metabolic emergency. Replace with water, sparkling water, unsweetened herbal tea, and for people who miss the flavor dimension, water infused with actual citrus slices or cucumber. Then add foods that actively support nitric oxide production. Beets and beet greens are exceptional here. They are rich in dietary nitrates that the body converts into nitric oxide through a pathway that bypasses the fructose-uric acid blockade entirely. A small study published in the journal Hypertension found that 1 cup of beet juice daily reduced blood pressure by an average of 7.7 millimeters of mercury systolic within 24 hours. That is comparable to many blood pressure medications. Other nitric oxide supporters, arugula, leafy greens, pomegranate, garlic, which also reduces arterial stiffness, and watermelon, which is rich in citrulline, an amino acid precursor to nitric oxide synthesis. Step 4. Move in ways that restore insulin sensitivity. I want to address this briefly because no nutritional protocol reaches its full potential without physical movement. And I know that for many adults over 50, this is complicated by joint pain, mobility limitations, and a history of being told to just exercise more without practical guidance. The most effective form of movement for improving insulin sensitivity is not long cardio sessions, it is resistance training combined with post-meal walking. Even a 10-minute walk after dinner, nothing intense, simply moving your large muscle groups, dramatically improves the rate at which your muscles absorb glucose from the bloodstream. This reduces the insulin spike following the meal. And every reduced insulin spike is a moment your kidneys are not being signaled to retain sodium. Resistance training, even light resistance, using bands or body weight, builds muscle mass. and muscle tissue is the primary site of glucose disposal in your body. More muscle means more glucose storage capacity, which means less circulating glucose, which means less insulin resistance over time. I want to come back to Raymond for a moment. So 3 months after we shifted his focus from sodium restriction to metabolic reset, eliminating the morning orange juice, switching from flavored yogurt to plain Greek yogurt, adding spinach and sweet potato to his meals, and taking a 10-minute walk after dinner, his blood pressure readings began to respond in a way that 2 medications alone had never managed. His systolic pressure dropped from an average of 151 to 128 over the course of 12 weeks. We were able to reduce one of his medications under careful supervision. He told me he felt, for the first time in years, like his body was working with him instead of against him. Raymond's kidneys were still the same kidneys. His arteries were the same arteries. What changed was the hormonal environment they were operating in. That's the point I want you to leave with today. Your blood pressure is not simply a mechanical problem requiring a mechanical fix. It is a metabolic signal. And when you address the metabolic environment, when you reduce the insulin load, restore potassium and magnesium balance, protect nitric oxide production, and give your body the nutritional tools it needs, the readings change because the system they're measuring has genuinely changed. The salt shaker was never the villain in your story. If you spent years following low sodium advice and wondering why your blood pressure won't cooperate, I want you to know that your experience is valid. The advice you received wasn't wrong. It was incomplete. You now have a more complete picture. You understand the insulin-kidney connection. You understand what fructose does to your nitric oxide pathway. You know how to read a label for hidden sugar. And you have a concrete, practical set of changes that address the root metabolic mechanisms, not just the downstream symptoms. That knowledge is yours to keep. If this kind of evidence-based explanation is what you've been looking for, science explained clearly, without oversimplification, without fear-mongering, I'd be grateful if you subscribed to this channel. Our goal this month is to reach 2,000 new members of this community. Each one of you who joins helps us continue making this kind of content available. If this video helped you see something differently, leave a comment below telling me what you're going to change first. I read every single one. And if you know someone who has been struggling with blood pressure despite doing everything right, share this with them. It might be exactly what they've been missing.